Friend, who appointed me as your judge and arbitrator? Friend Jesus, our Father did. In Acts chapter 10, Peter, the chief apostle, outright says, Jesus commissioned us to preach to the people and testify that he is the one appointed by God as judge of the living and the dead. So is Jesus being forgetful, or is he just trolling this guy? Actually, trolling him isn't far off. If you're unfamiliar, that expression is used to describe when someone purposely says things more to get a reaction rather than to further the conversation. As usual, Jesus is doing multiple things at the same time here. He really is trying to help this man with the question about inheritance, while at the same time using it as an opportunity to teach the whole crowd. And it's not the help that the man with the question wants, but it is what he needs. Even if we focus on this one guy, Jesus is giving him two answers. The first answer is, no, I won't help with your inheritance, and you shouldn't be worried about money anyway. But that question is doing something else. Who appointed me judge isn't just an annoying dismissal. It's a real question. And if the man stops to think about it, it could change everything. Jesus never says he isn't the judge. He only wants the man to think about why that man is assuming Jesus can help him. The thing is, so many people intuitively understand that Jesus is important. Even non-believers tend to have this vague idea of Jesus as a wise teacher who loved the poor. But Jesus doesn't want vague belief. He doesn't want thoughtless impressions of authority. He wants faith. This man with a question has the beginnings of faith. He knows that Jesus has authority to solve the problem, but he doesn't know why. And if he did, he'd realize that Jesus is there to solve a much bigger problem, a much more important problem than inheritance, the problem of his own heart. Now, if it wasn't obvious from all three readings, I'll say it plainly. We should care more about holiness and grace than we do about money and power. As St. Paul puts it in the second reading, think of what is above, not what is on earth. It's not that money is evil. Greed is evil. Self-reliance without God is evil. But money or grain is just stuff. Use it as needed, then let it be. Jesus gives us this parable about saving up grain, but can you think of another Bible story that involves someone saving a bunch of grain? Joseph in Egypt. The Pharaoh has a dream that Joseph interprets to mean there's a famine coming. So Jesus saves up 7 years worth of grain. And it's a good thing he does, because this investment saves the entire region from starvation. So why is it okay for Joseph to save up all of this grain, but not for the rich man in Jesus' parable? Joseph was the second most powerful man in Egypt. He was also very rich. The difference here, though, is that unlike the rich man of the parable, Joseph, the rich man, was even richer in what matters to God. Joseph in the Old Testament uses his wealth and power as instruments of love, where the man in the parable uses it as instruments of his own pleasure. What are these riches that matter to God? Faith, hope, and charity. The three theological virtues. Joseph had faith in trusting God's guidance about the famine. He had hope that God would provide enough grain to make it through. He had charity, love of others that moved him to save the grain for the sake of everyone, not just himself. This rich man in the parable, all he had was a bunch of grain. a bunch of money. When Joseph died, his faith, hope, and charity came with him, while the gold and the grain stayed on earth. When the rich man in the parable died, the gold and the grain stayed on earth, but he had nothing to take with him. Vanity of vanities, it's all vanity. That's why Jesus is challenging the man asking about his inheritance, to wake him up to the vanity of being so focused on money. And look, the man's brother should share his inheritance with him. Justice is a virtue. God is just. He wants us to be fair and honest with each other. But earthly justice, like earthly wealth, is not all that important in comparison with heavenly justice and heavenly wealth. And again, what is heavenly wealth? Faith, hope, and charity. So what the man with this question needs is faith. And that's why Jesus hits him with that question. Who appointed me judge? He's saying, if you're so ready to trust me with a lawsuit against your own brother, what else should you trust me with? The answer, of course, is his heart. Somewhat ironically, Jesus is judging this man right there. Jesus can read hearts, so he can do that. We can't. Jesus judges the greed in this man's heart and says, wake up. Why do children leave the faith they were raised in? Why do people leave the church they belong to their entire life? There are many reasons, but probably the most common one is this. They got tired of people using Jesus instead of actually following Jesus. What's insidious about this rich young man is the way that our sinful hearts can warp our relationship with God, and we can use God to make money instead of trusting and loving God. Precisely because we know Jesus has real authority, we so often try to wield that authority to our advantage. We see this in corrupt priests and bishops using their positions to manipulate, control, or simply profit off the people entrusted to them. It is a tragedy and a scandal and an outrage that the church faces in every generation. May God grant us courage and purity. But do you know where else people abuse church authority? Christ's authority? Friendships and children. When we're stressed about our own situations, like an inheritance dispute, it can be tempting to use Jesus like a weapon to guilt trip people into getting what we want. It might be subconscious, but some part of us thinks if I use Jesus' name, I can get this friend or my child to do what I want. And I bet most of you know exactly what it feels like to be on the receiving end of that kind of manipulation. It's especially galling when the person doing it is a hypocrite. Like if you're going to lecture me about following Jesus, but you don't even take him seriously yourself, what's going on? It's insidious because parents and friends should use their faith to convict the people they love. If I love you and I want you to go to heaven, I'll call you out on your sinful behavior for your benefit. But there's a difference between I love you, so I want you to stop sinning, and I want something from you, so I'll guilt trip you into giving it to me. Even when the thing that we want is right, like a fair share of Dad's inheritance, we're wrong for using that tactic to get it with that intention. Do you see how dangerous this is? So you see why Jesus was more worried about this man's faith than his share of inheritance? Not only is it a sin to use Jesus to manipulate other people, it's a really great way to make it hard for people trust the real authority of Jesus Christ. It jeopardizes your own relationship to Jesus, while at the same time driving a wedge into another person's relationship with Jesus. I want you to be detached from money. I hate greed. I want you to live simply, to be generous, and to work 10 times as hard at growing in virtue and holiness as you do at making money. But what I and Jesus want even more than that is for you to actually accept the authority of Jesus Christ in your life. Don't manipulate that authority. Don't treat it like a tool in your psychological arsenal. Accept it. Embrace it so that you can treat Jesus the way you should treat him. As the Lord of your life, your possessions, your relationships. Jesus is not meant to be a political ally or an investment tool. He is meant to be the Lord of your heart. And making that true is worth more than all the gold and grain in the world, and even more besides.